What's going on, guys? Matty Russell here. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make a DIY poultry brooder for quail chicks. Let's get stuck into the video. Now, in order to make this DIY brooder, the first thing you're going to need is a 90-litre container. This is a container which I picked up from the local hardware store, but any container will do. Ultimately, you want to make the container big enough to house the amount of quail chicks that you're anticipating on brooding in there. The next thing you're going to need is some hardware mesh, which I also picked up from the local hardware store. You'll need some zip ties. You're then going to need to add a heat source, in which case I've picked up a portable floodlight, which gives out quite a bit of heat. Now, you could use an alternate heat source, such as a heat mat or a heat lamp, in order to heat up the brooder. Regardless of the heat source that you use, it's important to understand that heating the brooder is the most crucial aspect. This is going to help the baby chicks, which have just freshly hatched, stay warm until around the 3-week mark, where they develop their adult feathers and can warm themselves. You'll then need an automatic waterer in order to keep the chicks hydrated, and an automatic feeder to keep their tummies full. You're also going to need to add some sort of bedding in order for the chicks to rest on and to make it easier to clean up their mess. In today's video, I'm going to go ahead and use some shredded paper, but you could also use wood chip or sawdust as an alternative. The tools you'll need in today's video is a pair of tin snips in order to cut the hardware mesh, an angle grinder in order to cut the plastic tote, a power drill, and a Sharpie to mark out your cutting line. Now, this 90-litre plastic tote or storage container comes with a lockable lid. On either side where the handles are, it actually has a latch that locks over and snap fits into position. I'd highly recommend this feature because it ensures that no predators can get into the brooder and harm the chicks. Now, the first thing we're going to start with is the lid. I'm going to take a Sharpie and mark out a perimeter that will be cut out with the angle grinder in order to replace that section with hardware mesh. Once we've marked out the perimeter, it's time to take the angle grinder and cut out that section of the lid. Don't forget your safety gear. Once we've cut out the hole in the lid, we want to take the hardware mesh, place it over that hole and leave a slight overhang in order to secure it to the lid. We then want to mark out that dimension and cut it with the tin snips. Once we've cut out the hardware mesh to the right dimensions, we want to take a drill and drill out holes at various intervals about 2 to 3 inches apart, right the way around the perimeter, in order to secure it to the lid with the zip ties. Once we've drilled out the holes, we want to take the lid, flip it upside down and secure the hardware mesh to the underside. Once we've secured it to the underside with the zip ties, we want to go ahead and cut off the excess zip ties with the tin snips. Once we've cleaned up the underside, we'll go ahead, flip the lid over, and I'll show you what it looks like. Now, the reason we cut out the hole is firstly in order to enable ventilation and airflow so that the chicks have got plenty of oxygen. We put on the hardware mesh in order to protect from rodents or snakes or other predators that would seek opportunity to get themselves a free feed. Now the next thing we want to do is make it a little more homely. And in order to do that, I'm going to take some shredded paper and lay it down on the bottom of the brooder as some bedding for the baby chicks. I'm then going to put in their waterer and their feeder, pop the lid back on, then I'll show you how to install the light as a heat source to keep them warm. Now, rather than actually secure the light to a fixed position on top of the brooder, I'm going to go ahead and take these two bits of timber which have been nailed together and screw the light to it like so, in order to have this light portable. That way I can move it anywhere around the brooder that I feel is necessary and really experiment with different height levels and different positions of the light in order to get the right temperature for the chicks. Now, the way that we'll be able to tell whether or not it's too hot or too cold is based on the chicks' activity inside the brooder once they're in there. If it so happens that the light is creating too much heat, then the chicks will try and get away from the heat source and they'll end up congregating on the outside perimeter inside the brooder. If they're too cold, then they'll huddle on top of each other inside of the brooder directly under the light source. But the idea is for the chicks to be as comfortable as possible at just the right temperature. And a good indicator of that is that they're not too far away from the light and they're not too huddled up underneath it. Although they may at various times, depending on the temperature outside, congregate closer to the light. However, you don't want the chicks lying on top of each other in order to try and get warm. That's a good way to suffocate them, and the chicks on the bottom could very well die. So let's get this light screwed to the bits of timber to make sure it doesn't fall off. Well, the brooder's set up and we're ready to add the chicks. The only thing is, the chicks are still growing. As you can see, they're still in the DIY incubator and they'll be hatching within the next 5 to 6 days. If you'd like to see how I made this DIY incubator, then I'll leave a link to that video in the description below. But there you have it, guys. That's how you make a DIY poultry brooder for baby chicks. If you're getting a lot out of this video, why don't you hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll catch you in the next video. Cheers.